So I guess we'll go ahead and get started. Welcome everyone to our Global Counterterrorism Institute webinar series. This event is centered around crypto and banking in AML CTF, and that is anti-money laundering, countering terrorism financing. I know we have folks from all over the globe here today. Thank you for attending. This is a two-day weekend webinar. Today's events highlights presentations by our new affiliate, ARMADA from Israel, Ms. Ella Rosenberg. Also, Mr. Mohammed Omar, our own International Criminal Justice Director Program Manager, he'll present as well. Oliver Wilcox is with the U.S. State Department Director of Counterterrorism and Countering Violent Extremism. We did have one other, but she is sick right now and unable to attend. So with that, there are many layers of threat, and a new approach and strategy was needed for dealing with that. A global strategy for counterterrorism has been developed in the most recent White House release with a clear and concise strategy for one and vision of global inclusion for another. And GCTI, our Global Counterterrorism Institute, is an international level, operationally and academic, independent-minded, nonpartisan institute. And what does that mean? Well, academically has been in the past the majority of the mindset of people when it came to counterterrorism. And with 9/11, we turned to a tactical approach to dealing with counterterrorism and different methodology. And so with that, 20 years later, we find that we're still in the same situation. And so our institute decided to, with the mission, shape intellectual discourse and dialogue and impact public policy uniquely. Even though we're nonpartisan, education does affect public policy. And it was to develop an online educational curriculum with using the new NATO counterterrorism reference guide with an action through a head, heart, and feet strategy, the head being research, data gathering, polling, and academic partnerships, and the heart being civic education, training, and development, and the feet being on the ground organizing with issue-based campaigns with train the trainer type events that we'd hold in the country that requested it. And so with that, we'll open up our webinar today with our guest VIP speaker, Mr. Suresh Netke is from Cameroon, and Suresh has worked with Fortune Global 1000 companies in 35 different countries to solve problems business related to process and technology.
As you can stop watching videos and actually pay
Suresh, are you with us, sir? I think I see you. And can you?
Yes, I'm here.
Thank you, Suresh. Welcome, sir. How are you?
Thank you. I'm good. How are you doing, Todd? Hello,
good.
everybody.
So Suresh has worked closely on operational risk management for banks related to BSA AML compliance using self-learning models for anomaly detection and business process improvements. Suresh has extensive leadership experience in running high-growth business with general management responsibilities. His executive roles include Amberon, a fintech provider of risk management solutions, AzTechSoft, a technology consultancy, and Sun Microsystems, the creator of Java and a key technology provider for financial services industries. Suresh has been quoted as a business thought leader in the New York Times, Investors Business Daily, Chief Executive Magazine, and Asia Time. And I know you were just published in another, and I'll let you speak to that article. You were just published in that book. Also, GTech, CFO Rising, and Oracle Open World. He has testified as an industry expert before the California State Legislature, as well as U.S. Congress. So at this time, I'll let Mr. Suresh Netke open us up. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Todd. And thank you for having me here. I do appreciate you sharing my brief bio, but I do have to say that there are a lot of things which are happening in the last 5 or 6 months, which merit a lot of attention. There is a lot of discussion how things have evolved in the last 20 years, but I think in the last 6 months or so, there are things which have changed quite a bit. Now, Todd, can I show a couple of pictures here, or is that, do we have the facility to do that?
You can. Let me go ahead and I've shared the screen, sir. You can now.
Okay, so I just have a couple of pictures which I want to show you to just get the basic point across of what we are trying to do. It's always been about what we call follow the money. If you've heard that expression from, I guess, many moons ago. What has changed in the last 6 months is the passing of the AML Act, or known as AMLA 2020. This is probably the most significant piece of legislation since the Patriot Act about 20 years ago. And this almost mandates it requires banks, financial institutions to look very carefully at creating effective solutions. And we think that this is going to make a lot of changes in the system, especially in terms of adopting new technology. Now, also, the second thing that's happened is that crypto, and you can't look at crypto as something on the side now. Crypto is probably as much into the mainstream of AML consideration as anything else. And even though the amount laundered through, let's say, cryptocurrencies is kind of estimated to be on the lower side, it's still a pretty significant amount. Now, the point is, if we were to look back at how, let's say, the traditional approach to money laundering, which is, I guess all of you have seen this before, you take dirty money, put it in placement, layer it, integrate it into the system. This is how things have been done for the last many years, or centuries, if you will, if you want to count out different forms of a monetary system. But in the crypto world, things are a little bit different in the sense that although those physical boundaries that you had in terms of actually having to go to a bank to deposit money and move it around and wire transfers, in the crypto world, it's much more, how should I say, efficient and technologically advanced. So we have the concept of things like mixers and tumblers, which are, in a sense, ways of laundering money. And it's a simple thing as, if in the old days, if you did like transactions from person A, U, X to B, V, and Y, you could do it one way, and using mixers and tumblers, it becomes much more, you can sort of obfuscate the money trail here. The reason why this is important is, since this is now done automatically and anonymously, it becomes much more harder to be able to track the bad actors without actually using technology. So in a sense, money launderers are doing the same thing, but they're doing it at a much more scale, in a much more sophisticated, technologically sophisticated manner than they have been doing before. And we sort of believe that the answer to keeping up with the bad actors is advanced technologies. It's about data operations, it's about artificial intelligence, it's about privacy preserving technologies, all of which have kind of come about in the last 5 years or so. They have reached a point of maturity where they can actually be used to deploy not only the traditional AML problems of the past, but also the evolving AML methodologies, or sorry, money laundering methodologies, which are available in crypto. Now, if you were to step back from this, at the end of the day, what I do want to emphasize is, despite the technology, despite whatever visual aids we have, eventually it is going to come down to a judicious combination of machine intelligence and human intelligence to find a solution. I think there's a lot of talk about how machines are going to replace humans. It's really not the case. It's actually the dynamic of how humans and machines will work together to find out, as Colin Powell would say, what is most likely to happen is kind of the holy grail of what we're trying to go for right now. That is where the future is in terms of anti-money laundering and countering the financing of terrorism. So with that, I'll conclude my remarks. If we have any more questions, I'd be happy to answer them. But I think there is what we have done in the last 20 years is come to a point where things are at a turning point where technology is now available to actually address the problems that we've been dealing with for the last decades.
And with that, thank you, Mr. Sureshnecki. We appreciate your time and your information. And you're correct. Technology is even changing to the point that most online education is needed everywhere. And with the introduction of COVID into this global community, it's even made it more apparent. Online education is probably the future. Where we want kids in school and in classroom, yes, but the upper collegiate education should be available online. In most places it is. And so moving along, thank you again. And our next guest speaker is Miss Ella Rosenberg, straight to us from, I believe, Tel Aviv, Israel. And with that, I will introduce Miss Ella. Ella is the co-founder of ARMADA and a defense, fintech, and export expert in the Middle East and European Union. She consults on anti-money laundering and cryptocurrency and payment industries, blockchain, defense, HLS, cyber, prop tech, drone regulation, and EU firearms regulatory framework, the art industry, financial investigations, and tokenization of maritime logistics and real estate. In addition, she focuses on maritime fintech, EU jurisprudence, EU banking licensing, and UAE commercial licensing. She also frequently publishes opinion in financial magazines. And if you could all please mute yourselves. I know sometimes you don't realize it. So we don't want to interrupt Ella when she's speaking. You're going to want to listen to her presentation like we did yesterday. And I'll turn it over to you. Thank you.
Fantastic. Okay, so thank you so much, Todd, for the very, very kind intro. I would also like to thank everyone for joining us, and good evening from Tel Aviv. It's evening now here in Tel Aviv, but I'm pretty sure it's morning now in the States. And I'm not sure where we have another global presence, but from what I understood, we have participants from South Africa and from other places around the world. So I'm very, very excited to be here. And let's begin. Todd, if you may allow it, I will start sharing my screen.
You can.
That's okay. Fantastic. Okay, so hold on. Okay, great. So as I said, and as Todd introduced earlier, my name is Ella Rosenberg. I'm co-founder at ARMADA. I'm an EU regulatory consultant. And the focus of the webinar today is banking in cryptocurrencies. I'm not sure to what extent you have dealt with cryptocurrencies in the past. And I'm not sure to what extent, sorry for my cough, to what extent you started banking and depositing certain cryptocurrencies or liquidization of cryptocurrencies in banks. But this is something that is a very hot topic currently, especially in the anti-money laundering field, and especially with everything that has to do with fintech. Okay, so we shall start. So ARMADA as a company was co-founded by me and my co-founder Aviel Marziano. This is actually the first enterprise globally that tackles fintech and defense as a new concept, as one concept. We essentially defined defense banking solutions, financial intelligence, and maritime fintech. As I said, I'm an EU regulatory consultant focusing on the high-risk industry and tackling cryptocurrencies specifically within anti-money laundering. My co-founder is a strategic consultant, and he focuses on financial tracking, investigation, property, and defense sectors. The presentation today will be led by me. Now, I know that this topic, as a topic, is quite, how do I put it, kindly extensive. It's a topic that can be covered also not only within one webinar, but also within a series of webinars. And this is something that I know many programs around the globe are trying to tackle. This is a sort of introduction. So the purpose of this presentation is to make sure that you have the basic knowledge of what it is or what it means to have any sort of crypto or banking in crypto, but you also need to bear in mind that this specific presentation is not ad hoc. So you won't fully grasp the notion of banking in crypto because it takes time, but at the same time, you will understand how to at least start the process. Okay, so sorry, these are the topics we're going to discuss today. So first of all, we're going to discuss keywords within the presentation. Then we're going to discuss cryptocurrencies. I'm sorry for my cough. Cryptocurrencies and what they are. Then we're going to go through banking profiling, how to bank with crypto. Then we're going to discuss 6MLD. I'm going to briefly touch upon the AMLA, as Shirash mentioned, but only very, very briefly. Then we're going to discuss counter-terrorist financing in crypto, how to avoid counter-terrorist financing and red flags, export, a test case, and then we're going to have questions. If someone has questions in between the presentation, it would be wise to write me in the chat if you have questions so I can address them in between, not because I don't want to take time off the presentation, but because this topic, because it's in a build by build basis, it's really important that I have the questions in between, as you won't be able to understand the following presentation and the following slides as we go. So the keywords that we're going to discuss first, I have divided them into 3 levels. The first level is the maritime level. Has anyone of you ever dealt with letters of credit or bill of lading? If they have, please just pop in the chat if you have. If not, this is the last part we're going to discuss. This specifically has to do with everything that comes with cargo. So let's say I have hypothetically 1 ton of shoes that I would like to sell to Todd, for instance, and I'm located in Tel Aviv, and Todd is located in the States. How we conduct this sale with cryptocurrencies within the new financial system. We'll discuss that a bit later. Then we have the regulatory level. The regulatory level mentions very, very extensive keywords. These keywords are the regulators in the EU. So you have the EBA, which is the European Banking Authority. You have ESMA, which is the European Securities and Markets Authority. Then you have the ECB, which is the European Central Bank. You have the FCA, which is the regulator in the UK. You have the FIU. Now the FIU, each country has their own FIU. I'm going to specifically discuss the FIU in Estonia, and I'm going to mention later why. 6MLD, when we're going to discuss that legislation too. Racha PTS is implementation of 5MLD, the previous version of 6MLD in Estonia, and GDPR. I'm pretty sure most of you know what GDPR is. Then in banking, we're going to discuss CTF, counter-terrorist financing, anti-money laundering, cryptocurrencies, red flags, and PEPs. Okay, these are the keywords you're going to see pop up during this presentation. If you have any questions, again, just pop them in the chat and I'll gladly explain. So what are cryptocurrencies? When I started dealing with cryptocurrencies, a very wise man once told me, he started to explain to me what it is. He said that cryptocurrencies is the new banking method. It's banking renaissance, and I explain what it means. So when we were born a few years ago, there was only one form of money. It was governmental money, fiat money, and that's essentially US dollars, it's euros, Great Britain pounds, dirham, shekels, all the money that you see circulating around the globe. But in addition to that, within the last few years, you have a new set of money. And this new form of money is privatized money, and it's called cryptocurrencies. And it's based on a blockchain platform. So instead of me going to a bank, depositing cash, or instead of Todd, let's say, for instance, depositing cash in the States, this is a method that you transfer money on a client-client basis, peer-to-peer. So let's say I want to transfer Todd money, hypothetically. I don't have to go to a bank, deposit the money, and then send back to him. On a blockchain platform, it's a peer-to-peer level. I just send to him directly on the wallet. It's distributed across the globe. So today, there's not a single place you can't reach without blockchain. No, specifically, the technique which you have cryptocurrencies and how you distribute them is quite complex. I'm pretty sure you heard of Bitcoin. That's one type of cryptocurrency, but you have other coins. You have Ethereum, you have Dogecoin. I'm pretty sure you heard of Dogecoin as well. You have all of the sort of those coins. Now, if you want to take those coins and you want to utilize them, how do you do it? This is the main purpose of this presentation. So let's say I have 1 Bitcoin, hypothetically, on my wallet, okay? And I would like to liquidize it to make sure that I put it in the bank. So what I do, I go to a liquidity provider, usually on the exchange. I derive it back into fiat currency, which is either Great Britain pound or dollar. I see there's questions. I love questions. Yes, so good point. Hold on, thanks, Laurie. Okay, so an FIU, as Laurie says, is a financial intelligence unit, and the PEP is a politically exposed person. I'm going to get there in a second. So as I said, I go to the liquidity provider, and once I go to the liquidity provider, I get the fiat currency and I deposit back to the bank. This process is what we're going to discuss today, how to take that liquidization and deposit it in the bank. Okay, now the problem is with this method is that it has a lot of criticism, mainly because that a lot of the cryptocurrency and a lot of the cryptocurrency platform is sometimes used for some sort of activity which is unlawful, such as money laundering and terrorist financing. So this is why banks are very reluctant in making sure that this specific source of funds is deposited. So if I would like to deposit a certain amount within the bank, it's really important in that sense that the money is clean per se. It has nothing to do with money laundering and it has nothing to do with the terrorist financing. Okay, so banking with crypto. Banking with crypto, as a definition, is considered high risk around the globe. So there isn't a single bank around the globe that you'll go to that won't see banking as low risk, for instance, because every single transaction that you do on the blockchain platform is automatically flagged for money laundering and for terrorist financing. So certain banks and financial institutions that also deal with crypto, you also have financial institutions that deal with crypto that have nothing to do with banks. You have hedge funds, you have VCs, you have other sort of financial institutions that also accept source of funds from crypto. They usually go under a banking license. So once they have this banking license, they tend to refuse the funds sourced from crypto trading activity. Crypto trading activity is me going to an exchange such as Binance. I'm pretty sure you all heard of Binance quite extensively the last few weeks, or Coinbase, okay? And then I trade on a Bitcoin, either it's Bitcoin or Ethereum or Dogecoin. I just buy the cryptocurrencies and then sell them back, okay? That's considered crypto trading. This is mainly due to the fact that some platforms have non-compliant KYC. Okay, so once I would like to onboard a platform, let's say I want to onboard Binance, I have to give my passport copy, I have to give my email, I have to give my phone number, I have to give a lot of details that they can authenticate me as a person. Some platforms don't do that. And because they don't do that, the risk of money laundering and terrorist financing goes extensively high because of these things. Now, in addition to that, banks in certain instances not only can accept deposits from crypto trading under certain conditions, but only with compliant KYC submissions. Okay, and this has to go with the compliance departments within banks. So before we even discuss banking with crypto, it's important that we see how does a bank work. Okay, how does the compliance work within the bank? So pretty sure you all heard the word compliance quite extensively within your work or within your studies. What is compliance? So compliance has everything to do with everything. I think that's the best way to define it. Compliance can be medical compliance. So when you go to a doctor, let's say my cough, I went to the doctor, received medication, I am complying with what the doctor tells me. Okay, that's one sort of compliance. Then you have agricultural compliance. Agricultural compliance is how to make sure that the seeds that you plant in the field go specifically under Ministry of Health regulations. Okay, what does this mean? It means you have the general public, which has to comply to a rule. And this rule is set by a regulator. Same thing for banking compliance. So for banking compliance, you have the regulatory department, as you see it. They set out the rules. Okay, they set out how do how our clients accepted to the bank. They set out the rules. And beneath that, you have the compliance department that executes the rule. It's also a very good way to explain it is like having an emperor, and then you have a legal department of the emperor. So the emperor says, these are the rules, and the legal department executes it. But at the same time, you have the risk analysis department. So the regulatory department are not, they're not independent, and they can't be independent. They are codependent on the risk analysis department. The risk analysis department, what they do, they essentially give out the risk profiling of the client. So let's say I would like to go to a bank to open a bank account. I'm immediately profiled by the bank with my age, with my income, with the salary that I'm supposed to receive, my previous employment work, my previous banking reputation. That goes within the risk analysis department, which then they transfer that information to the regulatory department. They decide together on my profiling, and then they execute it within the compliance. But all of these three departments are essentially, they have to work in accordance to the legal officer of the bank. So each bank has a legal officer that oversees all of this activity, and then you have the head of the bank. The head of the bank essentially decides whether you get the bank account or you don't get the bank account, which is most important. Now, wait, let's see if we have any questions, because questions are important. Okay, fake cryptocurrency. So Ifan is asking regarding fake cryptocurrencies. We will get to that point in a second. So I'm going to discuss banking profiling, and then we're going to get to that point, okay? So it's a really good point, but I don't want to discuss it after banking profiling. So as I said, you're welcome. So as I said, once you onboard a bank, let's say I would like to open a bank account. The bank account is very specific to my needs. So I can open a personal bank account for my personal banking, but I can also open a company bank account for my company. So let's say there's Ella's bank account. It has Ella's name on it. And then there's ARMADA's bank account with ARMADA's name on it. But the thing is, within that bank account, you have two people that are in charge of the bank account, me and my co-founder. Okay, so first of all, you have to decide on the dedicated account itself. And then you have to profile it. Why is profiling important? Mainly because that without the profiling, the bank has a higher risk of money laundering and terrorist financing. And why is this quite critical? Because once this happens, the bank can lose its banking license. So if I want to open a bank tomorrow morning, I can do that, but I would need to have some sort of approval from the central bank of the country that I'm operating in. Let's say I want to open a bank in Israel, hypothetically. I can open one that's not a problem, but Bank of Israel would have to approve it. Okay, same thing in the UK. If I want to open a bank in the UK, I can do that, but Bank of England will have to approve it. Every single transaction that they do within the bank that they open is monitored not only by the bank itself, but also by the central bank of the exact country. So let's go with the example that I have a bank in England that it's regulated under Bank of England. If I do that, and I have an account that launders money on a constant basis, or even at least in one instance, it immediately goes to Bank of England. And then when that happens, Bank of England asks questions to my bank, okay, so the bank that I own, and I'm in risk of losing my banking license if I don't comply without the bank saying. So if we go back to the presentation, hold on. No, I'm not going to go back. But if we remember the slide, the previous slide, if you have the compliance department and the regulatory department, the banks have to execute what the regulator tells them. Okay, each bank has to execute what the central bank tells them because the central bank is the regulator. Okay, now banking profiling is dependent on the factors that you see here in this slide. Okay, so you have a client, and then you have to look at this geography. To look at his passport, where he's national from, and where he's resident from. When I studied in the Netherlands, for instance, and I opened a bank account with ING, I was resident of the Netherlands, but they listed in my nationality that I'm Israeli. Okay, but you have to look at the geography. Some countries are considered higher risk. Some countries are considered low risk. This is very dependent on FITF recommendations. I think you're going to hear quite a lot of FITF recommendations within the next year as well. But just as a general overview, the FITF is a global organization that tackles money laundering. All the banks essentially do what the FITF tells them, in addition to what the central bank of the exact country that they're operating in tells them to do. Then you have to look at the amounts. So if I want to deposit £10,000 in my personal account and I have the salary to prove it, it should be fine. But if I want to deposit, I don't know, 2,000 Bitcoins, okay, liquidity of 2,000 Bitcoins, and I don't have the source of funds for it, that is considered high risk. I have to prove why I'm entitled to do that. Nationality, I mentioned specifically, but also banking prospect. The bank also looks on how much they think you would deposit when the exact activity. So I'm not sure how many of you opened a company bank account, but when you open a banking company bank account, they ask on how much money you think the company will generate within the next year, 2 years, whatever. And once you do that, they also look at the type of activity that you would like to generate. This is why it's also important when you define the bank account, the banking activity. Okay, so they look at the banking prospect as well. And they also look if you're a PEP. A PEP is a politically exposed person. What is a politically exposed person? It's every single person that has anything to do with the politics of a specific country. Okay, we will go into PEPs in a second. There's a slide just on PEPs where we'll discuss it too. But just so you know, if you are a PEP, it's very difficult to open a bank account and it's very difficult to operate a bank account. Now, specifically for Ifan's question, okay, so Ifan asked a question, and the question is the following. What are the chances of introducing fake cryptocurrencies? So as for your question, there's no such thing as a fake cryptocurrency, okay? There's a regulated cryptocurrency and there's a non-regulated cryptocurrency, okay? A regulated cryptocurrency is a coin, it's a digital coin issued by a company. This process is called an ICO, which is an initial coin offering, or an STO, which is a stable token offering, okay? One of these two coins can be either regulated, so it can go to the FCA, the Financial Conduct Authority, can go to Gibraltar to issue these ICOs as well, can go to specific countries that issue these ICO licenses to continue the process of raising revenue on that coin, okay? Then you have unregulated coins. Okay, these unregulated coins usually happen in the Caribbean. I would highly recommend not taking any sort of work with them, mainly because that these specific coins or processes, ICO processes, because they're not regulated, if you lose any sort of investment conducted by that company, you won't have a regulator to go to. Why? This comes to the point where regulators are so important. Regulators are important because they safeguard the clients' and the market's rights, okay? They safeguard you, they safeguard your investment, and they safeguard everything that has to do with your investment in that company. So let's say I buy, let's say I buy an ICO, a coin issued by an ICO that is regulated under the FCA. If I lose my money, I can go to the FCA and complain, okay? If I don't do that, if I work with a company that issued a coin, which is not regulated, I don't have anyone to go to complain to, okay? Does that answer your question, Ifan? Yes, no? Yes, no would be very helpful.
Yes.
Yes, fantastic, good. If
Very
you're speaking
exciting. Thank you.
Amazing, amazing. If you would like, I can also send you a few links later to the participants on countries that do regulated ICOs. Actually, ARMADA is in the process of an ICO right now for a company that we're doing. We're helping them with their process. So if you'd like to know more about that, we'll be more than happy to explain. Are there any questions up until now? I know that I'm going on like a highway, but it's really important. If there are any questions up until now, you should tell me now. No? You sure? Good, let's continue. Why is banking profiling important? So as I said, it's really important because it's really important when you onboard the client. In addition to that, it also shows to the bank how dangerous the client is. I don't need to explain to you that certain clients, oh, there's a question. Okay. Okay, Maher has a question. Okay, Maher, may I please read out your question? I'll read it. Which countries and which cryptocurrency already admit usage and made integration with LCs? Okay, on SWIFT. Okay, I'm going to discuss LCs in the end of the presentation and how it works with cryptocurrencies in LCs. FATF recommendations, you have FATF recommendation number 24 and number 15, okay? I would recommend you go on other recommendation 24 and 15. If you have any more questions specifically on FATF, please feel free to contact me, either on LinkedIn. I'm pretty sure Todd can also send your email to me or vice versa. FATF as a topic is an entire different webinar. Okay, it's an entire different webinar. It's an entire different set of rules. You need to understand, most welcome. It's an entire different set of rules. You need to understand what it means. SWIFT, okay. SWIFT, okay, the question is, how do cryptocurrencies get along with SWIFT? That happens when the money is deposited in the bank. Then you can transfer it in whatever SWIFT method you would like. But that's not the problem. The problem is getting liquidity into the bank. Okay, that's the issue. That's the problem. Because banks are technically not able to receive cryptocurrencies. I can't go to my bank right now and say, okay, take my Bitcoin. I can't do that because they don't have the technology for it. They don't have blockchain technology. They don't have the hot wallet. They don't have the cold wallet. Also, you need to understand that there's the issue of the hot wallet and the cold wallet. Okay, a hot wallet is the wallet which you just transfer the cryptocurrencies back and forth. Okay, the cold wallet is where you store it. They don't have that technology. So I can't go to my bank and just deposit it there. What I can do, I can liquidize the money. So I can take the Bitcoin or whatever, liquidize it, and then send it back to the bank. Okay, that's the issue. Any more questions? Good. So.
Ella, I've got a question.
Sure, Lori.
Just on that point of the transfer of the coins, that would be one, you would buy the coin and sell the coin, yes? That,
yeah.
Obviously, that would be fine. But there's another thing that's quite interesting, especially with the launch of new cryptos. And that's when you're actually mining the coin.
Yeah.
So, I mean, to find source of funds when you've actually mined the coin, you haven't actually bought it, you've mined it.
Yes, you've mined it.
How would they deal with that? Because you can't prove that you've bought it because you've mined it. So for example, like Pi is this new thing that's being launched now, and everybody's mining it. But I mean, I'm sitting with 2,000 Pi already.
Oh, lucky you.
Yeah, I'm mining. But now if Pi gets a value of $10 or, they're saying it could go up to $2,000 fairly quickly. Yeah. How do I prove, because that's $4 million, $4 million, and it's just mining. I can't prove that came from.
I'll explain to you how you do it. So Laurie's question, everyone, is the following. What I spoke up until now are cases in which you buy a ready-made cryptocurrency, you trade in it. So let's say I go on Binance and buy a coin, okay, something that's already existing. But before that, you have a level of mining. Mining is when the coin is created, okay? And when the coin is created, you have different methods to do it. I'm not going to go into that in this specific lecture. But when this happens, it's called the mining process. Now, how does the bank understand where the source of funds of this coin comes from? Because I can't prove here a receipt. I don't have a receipt for this, okay? I don't have any sort of, a back, source of funds on this. The best way to do it, and there are companies that provide this technology, is to show, this is also something that ARMADA does, by the way, is to show that the mining itself was created from a clean source. And then you see within the specific, it's like a graph, it's very interesting. And then within a specific graph, you see how the coin has essentially split towards what activity, okay? This has to do, and this is really dependent on if your bank accepts it, okay? Some banks accept these reports. Certain banks in England accept this report. Two of the major banks in Israel accept this report. Bank Leumi and Bank Hapoalim accept this report, but there are certain banks that don't accept it. Mining reports are very important. It's a very good point that you raised, but you need to work with the bank beforehand and tell them, guys, I would like to deposit this amount. You go to your banker, you call your banker, you say, yo, banker, hi, good morning, how are you doing? Hope you had a very good weekend. I would like to deposit, okay, a certain amount that has been mined. Then he'll get scared and say no, and then you'll say yes. You tell him that you want to deposit it anyhow. He'll call the compliance department. The compliance department will get scared as well, and they'll tell you no. Okay, then you have to ask and speak to the chief compliance officer. Okay, once you speak regression analysis, yes, I'll speak. Okay, good point, Todd. I'll raise it in a second. I'll finish my explanation to Laura, and then I'll get back to Todd's point. So once you speak to the chief compliance officer and you show them this specific report and you show how the Bitcoin has, I'm saying Bitcoin can be any sort of currency, has been split, they should accept it. But it depends on the regulator. If you're located in South Africa, I'm not sure how the Central Bank of South Africa works, but the FCA, which is very similar to the Central Bank of South Africa, does accept this. So you really need to check the bank. Okay, that's specifically on that. Now, Todd has a question. Can I read out your question, Todd?
Sure, go ahead.
Sure, okay. So Todd is asking the question of, can you use regression analysis to show the valuation over time like you would a stick? Yes, yes, you can do that. So if you show a regression analysis and you show the specific splitting, you can do that. Some banks accept it, banks in Israel accept it, and Bank of Israel as a bank is very strict. It's a very, very strict central bank. In certain cases, it's even more strict than the European Central Bank, certain instances. Okay, I see that Andrew raised a hand. Andrew, do you have a question?
I was
Yes,
just going to point out. Yeah,
Hi.
sorry, I was going to point out, we do regression analysis in our information technology coursework. And that's why I asked, because to value a stock over time, you can prove the overall, how much amount you made over time and without showing a receipt. That regression analysis, if you do a comparative, you can actually do it that way. So that's why I pointed that out.
Okay, okay. No, it can be done. As Todd said, it can be done and is accepted. Andrew, you have a question. Pleased to meet you, sir. Michael.
Yes, nice to meet you. Thank you for your presentation. Very interesting so far. I am concerned about these regulative policies being used as capacity building leverage in developing countries and countries that maybe opt for high risk, high reward business exchange opportunities, such as the developing infrastructure with the Silk Road. I can imagine scenarios where the Chinese would say, hey, we can offer some sort of regulative capacity building under the guise of capacity building and development for the sake of the African infrastructure to increase. And they would use crypto and regulative policies as leverage. So just like with every other technology, there's risk of corruption, of weaponization, of getting into the wrong hands. So is this something that the crypto literature is wary of?
Yes, and I'll tell you, it's really funny you're mentioning it, and you're mentioning Africa as an example. First of all, thank you for your question. Great question. And it's really funny that you're mentioning Africa as a continent, because Africa specifically has been dealing with these issues within the last 2 years in a very in-depth manner. Okay, I'm not sure if you've seen what's going on with Ghana lately. They have issued an entire new, yes, I'm pretty sure you saw it. So for general knowledge, Ghana has issued a very interesting, a new cryptocurrency act, very, very interesting on a very low risk level, and a new fintech regulatory sandbox. A regulatory sandbox is a place where many participants in the fintech sphere can ask questions and get answers from the regulator. Okay, it's been working amazingly well in Sweden, and it's been working amazingly well in the UK. Okay, specifically for cryptocurrencies. Now, I'm not an expert on African fintech law. This is a pivot, and bear that in mind, and the entire African continent, okay? But with that said, what you're specifically saying, and correct me if I misunderstood, you are discussing the regulatory framework of the cryptocurrencies and how this regulatory framework has an effect. Okay, so I've been saying this for the last, I think ever since I started working in fintech, and I've been saying this in every conference that I went to. Finally, the EU has caught up with me with the AMLA. But the funny thing is that globally and within each and every single market today, there's not one harmonized cryptocurrency law. Okay, this does not exist. So I'll take the European Union as an example. This is where I primarily work in. If you look at the EU and you Google EU law, cryptocurrencies, you're going to find 2 sets of laws that pop up. You're going to find 6 AMLD, which we're going to discuss in a second. Probably the new FCA regulations are going to pop up, but that's the UK and they're not part of the EU, sadly, anymore. And then you have the AMLA, okay, that was mentioned a few minutes ago, that is not yet implemented, only on the level of a proposal. But if you look for cryptocurrency law, you won't find it, okay? Certain countries, what they do, they put cryptocurrencies under anti-money laundering laws. This is what Estonia did, okay? So what did Estonia do? They took the previous money laundering directive of the EU, 5 AMLD, and they issued Racha PTS. Okay, that's their implementation of the directive. We're going to discuss it in a second, and we will discuss the regulatory framework. But as for a question, there's no real cryptocurrency law globally. No such thing exists because the regulator always follows technology. Technology jumps, and the regulator follows. It never goes the other way down. Okay, does that answer your question? Yeah.
It does, but it links into an even greater worry which I had, which is why I asked the question in the first place, which is there are no universal cyber laws either, not even if we restrict it to the continent of Europe.
Not right, to an extent. In the EU, you have ANISA, which is the regulator for cyber. You have ISO recommendations and level of harmonization. We're going to discuss, I know this is not a legal presentation, but we will discuss the regulatory framework in a second. Okay, I'm getting there, don't worry, I'm getting there. Now Maher has a question, a comment, if I may say so. It says, if I may read it out loud, he says, it means central banks and each state have to regulate their cryptocurrency, which one's maximum volume percentage according to the risk, assessed risk in the state economy? Yes. Okay, so what Maher is saying, he's saying that you have to look at the cryptocurrency in a specific way, in a specific manner, and then adapt it to the specific legislation. I would recommend everyone, and you can send it, I can send to you later after the presentation, the specific law if you're interested. The Estonian law on anti-money laundering and cryptocurrencies. It is the most extensive piece of legislation written till now on this. I would really recommend reading it. Also, Bahrain. Interestingly enough, Bahrain has an amazing legislative system on cryptocurrencies, written most beautiful manner. You can read it, and they also discuss the risk there. So the previous ARMADA framework discussed the risk of up until 30,000 euros. As low risk, 30,000 and above, high risk. Now it's 15. Okay, so things are changing very drastically. I'm going to continue with the presentation, so we won't run out of time. So how do banks accept cryptocurrencies? This is the fun part, okay? This is where you actually get the money in the bank. So the client wants to deposit fiat currency. Fiat currency, as I said beforehand, US dollar, Great Britain pound, euros, any sort of currency that you use, originated from crypto, okay? So let's say I have a client, his name is A, okay? A has 10 Bitcoins, okay? And his wallet, he liquidizes it, gets the said amount. A goes to his bank, would like to deposit this amount. The bank asks for the applicable source of funds for the deposit. And if that works, the bank accepts the deposit. Okay, that happens. But how do you make sure it's accepted? There's a KYC list, okay? A KYC is know your customer. KYB is know your business, okay? So when you deposit money on a KYC, so know your client basis, you need to give your passport copy, the source of funds, and then you're going to start a regulatory tango with the bank. What does this mean? It means that they're going to ask a lot of questions and they're going to ask for a lot of documentation. Then you have two sort of methods to deal with it. Either you go fight with the bank, okay, which is not very recommended because then you'll have your bank account closed, or you comply with what the compliance department asks you and you give the specific documents. But you have to give to the specific documents only to an extent that it doesn't hurt your personal rights. I'll give you an example. Bank Hapoalim, it's a very large bank here in Israel. I think it's the second largest bank here in Israel, accepts deposits from cryptocurrencies. But in order for those cryptocurrencies to be accepted, the fiat money from that cryptocurrencies to be accepted, they asked a month ago for the wallet addresses for each deposit. Now, you can do that, but do you really want the bank to know your personal wallet address? That is a problem. Okay, this is where your privacy is hindered. So I know that what certain consultants did, they told them to just give the beginning and the end of the wallet address, not the entire wallet address. So they blacked out the majority of it. That's one method of doing it. This is why it's really important to work with a lawyer or a consultant or a regulatory consultant when dealing with deposits, because you have no idea how much the bank will ask questions. Now, this will take a while. It will take a bit of time, but eventually, if you follow the bank, the money will be deposited, not because the bank wants to be your enemy. The bank is actually your best friend here. The compliance department is your best friend because they want that money in the bank just as much as you do because they can get interest on it. But they don't want to lose their banking license at the same time. So if you follow their laws, it should be okay. In addition to that, you also need to bear in mind that the risk committee of the bank always works in accordance to 6 AMLD, and 6 AMLD is super strict on these things. This is why it takes a bit of time. What is 6 AMLD? Now, Andrew had a very specific question a few minutes ago in regarding to the anti-money laundering directive, okay, and the regulatory framework that we have within the European Union on this. So I think I should explain first what is a directive and what is a regulation, okay? So EU law, if you ask what EU law is, it's a regulatory framework. So you're not going to have a law that says EU law number 1234. No, you either have a regulation or a directive. A regulation is the highest form of harmonization. It means you can take this piece of paper and you can go to each court in the European Union, okay, and they'll accept it. A directive is the lowest form of harmonization. And what happens there is that the specific directive has to be implemented by member state. So 6MLD in Italy won't look the same as in France or Germany or Estonia, because each country will implement it differently. Now, 6MLD set a new level of scrutiny for anti-money laundering, okay, in the EU, in a way that, first of all, the risk assessment is very different. It's very, very scrutinized. In addition to that, they added 3 risk categories. They added the defense industry, which is the first time you have the defense industry situated on a higher risk level. You have the art industry, which is also the first time that you have the art industry situated on the highest level of risk, and you have the crypto industry. I can understand why crypto has been decided to be the highest level of scrutiny. Art, you can also say that because art as a method is actually the first method of blockchain. So in the past, when people wanted to launder money, what they did, let's say I have $1 million I would like to launder hypothetically, I buy a Picasso, okay? Once I buy that, I take it and I sell it to a different person. He liquidates that money from his sale. Okay, that is the original token. You see what I mean? Defense has never been considered high risk. It's the first time that they're considered high risk because of the volatility that happens in this industry, okay? Because this industry is very volatile. This is why they have considered it high risk. Now, counter-terrorist financing in crypto. Before I start, CTF or counter-terrorist financing is considered CTF in the EU. There are certain jurisdictions that call it CFT. Okay, so for the purpose of this presentation, I'm going to call it CTF because I'm using EU law. Under US, I think it's CFT. But if you have any questions, it's the same. Okay, it's just the jurisdiction changes. Restricting movement of funds of terrorist organizations. Okay, and cryptocurrency is part of the fact that they're quite volatile, but also not only they're volatile, but also they're quite secretive, and you don't really know who transfers you what kind of currency and to what wallet. It can be used for terrorist organizations, and it can also be traced in that sense. You can trace it, but it's more difficult to trace. They're also prone to very suspicious transactions, and usually suspicious transactions are seen as CTF. Now, 6MLD as a directive takes a very strict approach when dealing with CTF, which makes it very difficult for banks as a bank, which are regulated under 6MLD, to accept any funds generated from crypto. Any questions up until now? What is CTF and how CTF is related to crypto? Now would be a very good time to ask, because this is where it gets tricky. Yes, Andrew.
Yes, so I have another perhaps obvious question. You raised earlier that it's ideal for banks to know your wallet tracking information for privacy reasons, but this goes back to the centuries-old debate of security and privacy, right? The trade-off is worth it to track mischievous transactions or questionable transactions of sorts. So what's your position on to the incentive of the banking industry to want to have that particular information for the sake of managing to track these?
I would answer that question very gladly, once we finish this, because this is a question that has to do specifically for my opinion on the banks, which I would love to give you my opinion, but I need to finish under time restraints at the presentation. So once I do that, I'll answer that question. Unless there's a technical question, what is CTF in crypto, I would continue. Okay, good, fantastic. So how to avoid CTF flags, red flags in crypto. First of all, what is a red flag? A red flag is when the compliance department sits with your documents, they have a look at all the documents you sent them, and then they go, oh, there's a problem. Uh-oh, the uh-oh is the red flag, okay? When does the compliance officer have the uh-oh moment? They have it when the amount is very suspicious. The amount is suspicious when it's very, very, very round, exactly $50,000, or exactly below the framework for the specific country. So for Estonia, what they did for a long time, because the framework was 30,000, I saw transactions of 29,999 euros. Okay, that's an uh-oh, that's a red flag. Okay. You also look at the UBO. The UBO is the ultimate beneficiary ownership. Who owns the account? Okay, so if you look at the person who owns the account, that person can be normal, like all of us, or it can be someone that all of a sudden, within the documents that he submitted to the compliance, has decided that he wants to trade in bullets or in diamonds or in stuff that is considered slightly higher risk. Okay, you also look on that point. Then you look at the geography of the person. Okay, where was the exchange located? Is it from a reputable jurisdiction? Is it FCA? Is it a European jurisdiction? Is it an American jurisdiction? Is it a Commonwealth jurisdiction? Is it some, God forbidden country where they don't have any sort of crypto laws and it's actually based on a legal opinion? Okay, you look at that. Then you look at the crypto tracking. Now, the crypto tracking is a new thing that banks are asking for, where they look at the split of the Bitcoin. This is something new that they're asking for. This has not been the case a month ago. This is something that they added around 3 weeks ago. I'm talking globally. So how to solve red flags in suspicious CTF transactions. Important point. Not all transactions that are flagged as CTF are CTF. 90% they are, 10% they're not. Okay. These 10% usually happens when the documents are not submitted properly. And this has to the banker to know what they're doing. I would expect you to know what you're doing. Okay, so how to make sure this does not happen? You either provide the supporting documentation on the fullest extent. So when they ask for the passport, you don't, and I've seen it before, they don't just give a blurry passport photo that you have on your WhatsApp. You go and you scan the passport on a PDF. And you do it normally in color and in high resolution. The utility bill, the UB, you give a normal utility bill within the last month, either your electricity bill or water bill. Okay, they even ask for employment contracts. Make sure your employment contract is up to date. Declarations. Banks love declarations. Once you deposit the cryptocurrency, you're going to sign the Magna Carta of declarations, making sure that you declare that has nothing to do with CTF or AML. Okay, make sure you sign that. The FATF geography risk assessment, as I said, you need to make sure that the geography is associated properly with the transaction. Okay, this is why you always work with a reputable exchange. PEP screening. I discussed what a PEP is, okay? There's a thing called PEP screening in which you put your name in a specific platform, LexisNexis, WorldCheck, CDDS. And once you do that, the screening essentially gives you a list of whether you're clean or not clean, okay? Whether you are associated with unlawful activity or not. Very important you provide that. Blacklist screening. Make sure you're not blacklisted by FATCA or by the FCA or Bank of England, okay? Stuff like that. So they also screen onto that effect and then they profile you. After you give them all of the supporting documents and all of the screening, blacklist screening, declarations and everything, they profile you. In accordance to that, what they do, so we need to keep okay. I'm going to wrap up a bit quicker now because we're running a bit on time. Okay. Fantastic. So, as I said, the bank profiles you in accordance with the documents that you have. So crypto in export and letters of credit. So letter of credit. What's a letter of credit? A letter of credit is a document, okay, that sets out other documents. These other documents are needed for the bank to accept a cargo transaction, okay? So let's say I would like to sell Todd 1 ton of shoes. I need to provide the quality, which is essentially a document of title. This is what the letter of credit is. This is how banks work with cargo. Letters of credit are mandated under UCP 600. That's the regulatory framework. Now, usually letters of credit within the last few years are failing drastically. Why? Because you only have 5 working days to submit all the documents, or the transaction falls through and there's no deal. That's how it works. Now, how does crypto fall into this? Okay. Hold on. So, crypto transactions are conducted on a client's end basis. So I send it to Todd, Todd sends it to me. No, peer-to-peer. Letters of credit are not peer-to-peer. They're bank to bank. So my bank to Todd's bank. There's a way to solve the issue of letter of credit if, and this is important, if you have a digital bill of lading. What's a digital bill of lading? So a bill of lading is a title of goods, hypothetically, as I'm saying, on the shoes, or the 1 ton of shoes. But the problem with a bill of lading, that's a physical document. To this day, it's a document that's been transferred bank to bank physically. If you put it on a blockchain platform, so you issue a token on the bill of lading, it makes the letter of credit process go much smoother. It also creates a situation where you don't have fraudulent bills of lading. This has happened before, and banks have lost their banking license over this, and they have disqualified letters of credit on the basis of a fraudulent bill of lading. Okay, digital bills of lading are used on a DLT level. Okay, DLT technology, which are licensed under certain countries. Okay, and they also, in addition to that, they mitigate the risk of fraud. Okay, that's specifically for that. Now, we don't have a lot of time, so we're going to do 2 test cases. Okay, one test case is going to be on depositing crypto to a bank, and the second case will be similar, but slightly different. Okay, this is where we're going to do it together. So, the first client, her name is Loila Ponsby. She's 28. She's a civil servant at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. She's a UK national, and she wants to deposit 2.5 Bitcoin in fiat currency, Great Britain pound. She has a source of funds. It's crypto trading from Coinbase with liquidity. How would you put her risk profile? Higher. Yes, Lori. High? Why high? Low. Donovan says low. Who says low? Who says high?
I say high.
High. Why high?
She's a politically exposed person working for the Ministry of Foreign Affairs.
She's not politically. She's a civil servant.
She's a citizen. Okay.
She is not the minister. She's a civil servant.
Oh,
she can be a secretary there.
Yeah, no, then low.
Okay, Teresa, high or low?
It should be high, and low. It's in between, because it could be that as a civil servant and working for the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, and knowing that the Foreign Affairs has a lot of international interaction in terms of programs, maybe training, the money could have been for the ministry's use. And the rest of what
I understand what you're saying. Okay, then my example was badly written because the source of funds is from trading in crypto from her own employment benefits. So she received a salary, let's say hypothetically £10,000 per month, that amount, 1,000 pounds out of it, she bought Bitcoin. You see, she hasn't traded in foreign ministry funds. I do agree with the fact that you think that the volatility of her work is higher because she works for the civil government, but she's still considered low risk. Okay, so that will go very smoothly within the banking system. With that said, we have Felix Leiter. Okay, Felix Leiter is 39, very cool person. He's a cargo trader with his own enterprise. He's a US national, and he wants to deposit a very high amount of Bitcoin, and the source of funds in a C2B payments. So clients gave him money for his services. This is considered high risk. Why? First of all, the state itself is quite high. Bear in mind, every single time you have the United States involved in any single transaction in crypto, automatically the level of scrutiny goes higher because of FATCA regulations, okay? And the source of funds is quite difficult because you have a C2B payment. This is a payment that he received from a client, okay? Unless he proves there's a letter of engagement, a contract, or any sort of source of funds from the end client, the bank won't accept it. Okay. Now, I'm pretty sure you have questions, but bearing in mind the time and bearing in mind that I went a bit overboard with the time, I think Todd will take the floor from now. If you have any more questions, send them over. I will answer all of them either on the LinkedIn group or on the meet and greet.
Thank you, Ella. Fantastic presentation. That was very informative.
Most welcome.
Yes, and we'll actually, in keeping with time, we'll actually probably have time after Mohammed speaks. We have a guest call in from the State Department on time. At this time, I'm going to reserve your question period for afterwards and move on to, because I know people have questions. I have some more questions. We're going to move on to Mohammed Omar, our current Criminal Justice Program Director. Mr. Mohammed has served in the police for nearly a decade. And if you could stop sharing your screen. There you go. Thank you. In the United Kingdom. He's also served in frontline policing, criminal investigation department, traffic, training, and community policing. Mohammed has significant experience managing major incidents and complex security operations, both in public and the private sector. Thank you. Can you please mute? Also, I'm not sure if people are aware, but sometimes when you have your video and audio on, your audio goes out because your bandwidth is not high enough. So if you're wishing to talk and that happens, just turn your video off and you can continue asking your question. Mohammed spent almost a decade in Africa after leaving the police, managing complex security operations for a wider business sector and conducted complex investigations. He helped grow the security operations business through customer engagement and retention. Mohammed is an expert in security risk management, investigations, security operations management, operational policing, loss prevention, asset protection, executive protection, crisis management, resilience, counterterrorism and anti-terrorism, training, benchmarking, and quality management systems. He is a current advisory member and director of programs in criminal justice with Global GCTI. And he's also our diversity and inclusion program manager and working group director. So at this time, I will turn the floor over to Mr. Mohammed Omar. And we also may have to cut his question exactly at 11:55. We have a guest speaker coming on from the State Department. And so we may interrupt to hear this intervention from the State Department and then resume back to Mohammed Omar's questioning. So Mohammed, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you, Todd. Can you hear me?
I can.
Yeah, good evening from the UK. Good morning. Of course, I know Todd is morning. Good evening, Laurie. Good evening, good morning, or good afternoon, participants and fellow speakers. Thanks, Ella. It was a great presentation. I will share my screen. I will try to condense much of my presentation, just conscious of timing. Let me share my screen. Todd, am I sharing it now? No.
You should be able to. Yeah, there you go.
Yeah. Okay. So the subject today is terrorism financing laws, but I will not go into detail regarding laws. We'll look at some case studies and overview and the layout or the process of terrorism financing. I know Ella has gone in detail on crypto currency. There is a part on the cryptocurrency, but I will not, I'm conscious of the time. I will try not to go over it. So it's just the overview to look at what is, I mean, some of you may be aware of already what is money laundering and the money laundering cycle. So just to refresh your mind, you may have a look at that and the stages of terrorism financing and proliferation of financing. Then we'll look at the international legislation in terms of what United Nations Security Resolution on Terrorism Financing. What exactly does it say about terrorism financing, and the Financial Task Force on action on terrorism financing. And then just do a comparison between some offenses between UK and US legislation. And I know Cherish and Ella, they've mentioned some of the few, the EU law and the new anti-money laundering. So the outline for this will look at the money laundering cycle, the recent statistics, the terrorist financing stages and proliferation of financing, Hawala network. If you already do not know Hawala network, I'll explain to you, and look at stablecoins and misuse of virtual assets, which is already, Ella has already gone through. As I've mentioned, UN Security Resolution and an FTF Action Task Force. And we look at some reports on the UNDOC reported 2018. And in the UK Terrorism Act 2000, there's some offenses with regards what does the legislation says on terrorism financing, on money laundering, and US Patriotic Act and Anti-Money Laundering Act 2020. So what is money laundering? I mean, has been addressed in the Vienna Convention 1988, Article 3.1. The definition of money laundering, it is the convention or transfer of property, knowing that such property is derived from any offenses for the purpose of concealing, disguising the illicit origin of the property, or of assisting any person who is involved in such offenses to evade the legal consequences of these actions. So Ella has gone through all the process, the banking process, anything. So anyone working within the banking, I mean, what their role, they're looking in terms of if someone is looking to, there's a reason someone wants to money launder. There's crime or financing terrorism. So what is the process of money laundering cycle? So someone has collected this dirty money, either tax evasion or through drugs or for whatever reason. They now they're convented, they want to place this money, which is placement. When they place this money, so the first property is placed into a financial system, whether it's cryptocurrency or it's the bank account or whether using a Hawala network. And then they layer it, transfer it into, so there is, it could be either an offshore bank account, or could be a shell company that's been opened, where they need to place this money, or through another business that is not registered into. Or they could, there is another, which is, Ella has mentioned in terms of fraudulent letter of credit. So which businesses have seen in the past using it to transfer money across, and then the integration is, so that money reaches to another destination. What they do, they either purchase luxury assets, or they invest on assets such as houses, previous cases have seen it, vehicles or gold, which has been obviously in the Middle East. So that is a process of the money laundering. So the recent statistics is just briefly, when you look at it, it costs almost 2 to 5% of global GDP, and which is up to 200 trillion. And in 2009, UNDOC study was estimated that 3.6 of global GDP with 2.7% or up to 1.6 trillion being laundered alone. So when you see this, it's quite a significant figure. So that's the trends, which is I have briefly put it in, which I've already mentioned is up to 2 trillion, which is about 5% of world's GDP laundered worldwide in a year. So 90% of the money laundered goes undetected, which is quite 90%. So it's only 10%. So this meaning that there is more work needs to be done in terms. This is why you see policies, regulation, legislations, they're coming up on a regular basis, because the criminals out there, the terrorists, they're always coming up with new methods of trying to launder money abroad. The suspicious activity reports led to the blocking of about 31% of laundered money annually. And in 2019, the American State Department estimated that controlling money laundering succeeded but only 0.2%, 0.2%. And 80% of the laundered $3.1 billion was seized from the North America in 2009. So in 2019, anti-money laundering, non-compliant banks paid almost $6.2 billion fines globally. So most banks is now, they don't want to be ended up with these hefty fines for failing, their employee failing to pick up the red flags that has already been previously mentioned. Now, Shurius has mentioned, a lot of organizations now, they're coming up with software for detecting these activities, and it's been estimated by 2025 the whole business could reach up almost in terms of developing these softwares 2,717 million US dollars from 817.9 million US dollars. So it is the technology as well is evolving. So before I proceed, is there any questions? Can you hear me, Todd?
Yes, we can. We can.
All right. Okay. Sorry, I've just seen your message. All right. Okay. So just looking at in 2016, a Spanish Guardia Civil dismantled two well-known criminal syndicates. This was Operation Usura, and it was estimated that this organization laundered almost 62 million euros over a number of years. What they did, as we've seen the money laundering cycle, is through purchasing estates, and this was also through having shell companies and evading taxes as well. So 8 suspects were arrested, and as you can see, 191 real estate properties. They had 142 bank accounts, and also they had various phones and caches as well. So they had IT devices and cell phones which were seized. The authorities there searched almost 19 premises in Tarragona, Barcelona. So just moving on to terrorist financing stages, when you look at the process of money laundering cycle, it's different also with terrorist financing stages. The process itself is start with raising. So terrorist organizations, when they look to finance their activities, what they'll do is look, okay, let's say an individuals based in the UK, they'll go through non-profitable organization, whether it's a mosque or whether it's a school or it's a charity. They will donate, individuals will donate those money for whatever cause. A classic example could be at the moment where we have an ongoing situation in Afghanistan. So individuals also want to support individuals over there. So, however, there are legislations for any, so they will raised the money. Now, the next process is they're going to store it. How are they going to store it? And as mentioned before, it could be either they could purchase or transfer the money across by moving it, or they will look at it, cryptocurrency, for example, which is another stages of moving it or transferring through another bank. But storing it as well, it's a process where now this individual's got a lot of cash now. How is going to move this cash across, either using cryptocurrency or use Hawala network that I've seen in the past and it's been used. And then that money moves across. It could be also not necessarily transferring the money. It could be through assets, gold. It could be assets, purchasing assets in another country. And then that money now will be used. What is it going to be used? Is for terrorist operations. What they're going to be using is, for example, is to purchase weapons, to pay for the terrorist operators, to in terms of visas, their accommodation, whatever they're going to be traveling for their operations. And so this is it's a stages how terrorists use finances. So proliferation financing is raising of funds, as I've mentioned, and obscuring of funds and shipping of necessary items. So within in looking at, there's when the shipping of necessary item, not necessary, this could be weapons of, it could be any sort of weapon. Obscuring, it's hiding. This is illegal activities, these transactions these individuals they're doing after they've raised the funds for their purpose. Now they want to hide from the authorities. So this is just a network of proliferation networks. When you look at it, it could be from bank to suppliers, where you have ghost invoices, invoices that are not legitimate from the shell companies, and they could use broker. They could place an order to buy a house or equipment or assets in another country. Let's say they have a business. And then items will be transferred either by land or by air, and then it reach out to the end user. So it's just a process, and I just wanted to share with you so you can have a look at how the process. I'm conscious of the time. So briefly, I'll go through what is Hawala. Initially, this started 8th century, mostly in Asia and in India, like the Silk Road. And it's the most fastest system and safe and used to transfer funds either domestically or internationally, without totally avoiding a traditional banking system. And the way the system works, it is where, for example, you have an illegal immigrant working, let's say, for example, in the UK. They want to transfer money to Pakistan. So they don't have a bank account, because now to open a bank account, because of this, what Ella mentioned, you got to have an ID, you got to have a proof of address, you got to have at least a utility bill to prove who you are. So now this individual is an illegal immigrant, hasn't got that, but he's working illegally, okay, cash in hand, let's say working through a car wash. Want to transfer money to Pakistan for his parents, maybe legitimate. What form of transfer does he use? Because if he's going to use other forms of systems, such as the banking, Western Union, because of previous anti-money laundering, these organizations have put measures in place. So what we need to do is basically is going to go to someone who has a business, let's say an Asian grocery shop here, who has a business in the street. So we'll approach that person. I need to transfer money to Pakistan, to my parents. So that, let's say £500. So that person will know that he has a communication with another business over there in Pakistan. So he will say, okay, I can do that for you. Give me your parents' mobile number. So you get the mobile number. And then what he will do, he'll be given he will give the code to his parents. Could be a code from a £5 note, let's say the number of the note. So that person will contact his agents that he's using there. The money will not have to move from the UK. So who say whether you owe me money or I owe you money from the previous, transfer this money to this individual and make sure they'll read back this code when they accept this code. So that's how the transfer of Hawala system that works. And why is this system preferred and has been used in the past quite a lot? One is cost effective. It's quick and it's fast because there's no charges like what Western Union or the banks that will pay. So they're avoiding these charges, and it's safe. Okay, meaning safe is going through by family or friend referrals and knowing, and it's efficient and it's reliable. And also it's flexible and not bureaucratic because looking have to have ID, the process of utility bill and the banks, and having to have your signature or submitting your, so people, but a lot of people, because they don't have those documents, is convenient for them. It's anonymous. No, so if you want to transfer money across to another, no one is going to know, and you're not going to leave any trail that someone will know that you've sent that money across there. And it's, as I've mentioned, it's culture friendly. And also criminals are using it to transfer their criminal proceeds and also evade taxes and financial controls. This is the Hawala system is been used globally, and it's also, however, most countries now, they have given penalties to organizations that are starting this Hawala network because they have to register as transfer of monies, and if they are found just to use not to use proper regulations in terms of documentation, etc., that again they will get, because for tax purposes in the UK there are some organizations, there are some businesses that do like, and usually it will be like a travel business or a grocery shop, that they'll use this system, but they has to make sure that they have some sort of records and financial controls to make sure they pay taxes. And again, in terms of policies and procedures, that not transferring terrorist financing across. So a brief statistics on Hawala finances. It's almost $7 billion transferred to Pakistani through Hawala channels this every year. And you're looking about 40% of India GDP is through Hawala. $100 billion and $300 billion flow through informal remittance system every year. So just an example, a case study where Spanish police in 2019 arrested 10 people, and 14 houses were searched in Madrid and Valencia and Toledo, and where suspects have committed tax fraud and money laundering through using false invoices from illegal businesses. And this is where also through the proceeds of that were sent to Syria through Hawala system in order to support Al-Qaeda militias in the region of Idlib. The organization was part of a huge international clandestine structure, which were looking to basically to target Western economy to make it collapse. Ella has mentioned already about cryptocurrency. I will not go through what is stable coins and looking at crypto assets. And this is just a process of misuse of virtual assets, meaning of, as you've seen again, is the money laundering. And look at cryptocurrency, the whole is, again, I agree with Ella was mentioned. It is quite a complex topic, a complex discussion, needs a lot understand, because now you see when you start talking cryptocurrencies, you're also talking cyber terrorism, which is, as technologies evolve, there's a cyber terrorism, because you've seen it that terrorists also using where viruses to get form of payment, where they'll hack into a system and to get. So it's not only when you're talking about terrorism, it's only just talking like an individual going out there bombings. It could be also somebody sitting there with a laptop, sending out viruses and terrorizing individuals and just getting payments. If they don't get the payments, what you do. Now, the misuse of virtual assets, it could be also that cryptocurrencies, once they've layered that money, what do you do? There's a dark web They can also, from that dark web now, we've seen it that dark web is being used to buy drugs, to buy even human trafficking, buying weapons as well. So that is a very, again, a quite complex topic. Ella has gone through the red flags indicators in terms of looking at the size and frequency of the transactions, how transactions are dealt with involving new users or users, or with regards to anonymity and irregularities and source of funds of wealth and geographical risk. If you want to trace the money on virtual assets, trace the assets, you got to trace the networks. Look at the cyber victim, the victim's amount, who's the mule's account, and the money mule and cash withdrawal, wire transfer. For example, organized criminals nowadays don't use their own bank accounts. They'll either target a youth, a school kid who has a bank account, and they'll use that bank account to pay them a couple of £100 just to use that, so they're avoiding anonymity. So again, it's very important just to understand, if you want to trace the assets, you got to trace the networks in terms of virtual. Just a quick example on case study for crypto funding terrorism. Last year, September, French police arrested 29 people for financing Islamist terrorism in Syria. So Mesut and Walid, both 25 years old, as suspected of being members of Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, affiliated with Al-Qaeda. So they bought cryptocurrency coupons consistently worth of 10 to 150 euros, which is about $11 to 165. So this is another case study where you looked at. The authorities are there just to track this individual who are using crypto for funding terrorism. So briefly, I'll go through UN Security Resolution. The mandate on 2099 states that reaffirming that terrorism in all forms and manifestation constitutes of one of the most serious threats to international peace and security, and that any acts of terrorism are criminal and unjustifiable regardless of their motivations, whenever and by whomsoever committed. The United Nations also can impose sanctions in terms of maintenance and restoration of international peace and security, including countering terrorism and underlining the importance of prompt and effective implementation of relevant resolution, in particular Security Council Resolution 1999. I will not go all through that details. However, I'm happy to share the link, but this is just to give you an understanding that what United Nations resolution in terms of financing terrorism. And again, there is a financial action task force, which is has members organization around the world, which is mainly looking like criminalizing the financing of individual terrorists and terrorist organization, freeze terrorist assets without delay, and implement ongoing prohibitions, and also establish the capacity to develop robust destination proposal on individuals that meet the United Nations destination criteria. I will not go all through them, but they have operational measures, and you can by all means visit their websites where they have a lot of resources and materials in terms of what do they do in terms of monitoring terrorist financing. Just a quick statistics on UNDOC reports estimated that 75% where they establish an asset forfeiture unit. They have 50% have established an asset forfeiture fund. This is where look at the member organization in Southern and Eastern Africa. And also 32% have established an asset management scheme. So the United Nations UNDOC report looking at improving their tools for bilateral multilateral cooperation against money laundering and terrorism financing, and also to prevent and suppress illicit financial flows from drugs and crime, and implement UN Convention and International Standards for anti-money laundering and the counter-financing of terrorism. I'll just now go through the just some sections of Terrorism Act 2000. This is a UK Terrorism Act 2000, and looking at what does a person commits an offense in terms of raising a finance or arranging for arrangement. So if a person invites another to provide money or property, then they will commit, or they intends that it should be used or has reasonable cause suspect that it may be used for the purpose of terrorism. And then I will share with you an example. So also if a person receives money or property, or that money, you intend to use that without reasonable cause to suspect that may be used for a terrorism. And again, if section 17, look at if someone enters into an agreement or an arrangement, money or property that to be made available to another, or he knows or has reasonable cause to suspect that it will may be used for the purpose of terrorism. And then there's a section 18 for money laundering. If you conceal or remove or transfer any nominees any other way in concern of arranging. However, there's a defense if a person charged with offense under subsection 1 to prove that he did not know or had no reasonable cause to suspect that the arrangement related to a terrorist property. This is an example of a case called R.V. Sally Lane and John Lates. These are parents in 2019, they committed an offense looking at those offenses under Terrorism Act 2000. What happened, their son, Jack Lates, was in Syria. And the authority alerted the parents not to send any money because he was involved with terrorism. However, they were charged with 3 offenses, entering or funding arrangements with connection of for terrorism. In 2015, they sent him 233 via an intermediary in Lebanon, nominated by Jack. They trusted their son when he told them that he was acting as a translator and a civil administrator for Daesh. They did not support Daesh, its aims or methods. They were sentenced to 15 months imprisonment, suspended for 12 months, together with a 10-year notification requirement. So this is an example looking at those offenses under the legislation that they've committed and they were sentenced. And it's a quite famous case as well. So another within the Terrorism Act, there's a section 19 where a person, this is also could be a bank, where they believe that, or even if someone using a Hawala network or cryptocurrency, where they do not, if they suspect someone is committed an offense that it may be financing terrorism, they do not notify the authority. They could be committing an offense because they failed to disclose information under this section. So even a suspicion will suffice. Okay. However, there's a defense for this. If you have a reasonable excuse for not being aware, or where your person is in employment, or there's a procedure for making a disclosure matter specified in subsection 2, or is charged of the offense, but they have to prove they disclose the matter specified that subsection in accordance with the procedure. Okay, another section is where court, if a person is convicted, they can again forfeit terrorist property offenses. So, and also under the Criminal Proceedings Act 2002, there is a legislation as well. Under this legislation, this act, they can, a person is convicted if they believe that a person was financing terrorism, whether through money laundering, and that, let's say, if the assets or the cash they're found with, they can be forfeited, those items. Okay. There's for those offenses, when you look at it, section 15 to 18, the person can be imprisonment or a fine up to 14 years in jail. A summary conviction can take up to 6 months or a fine. That depends with the seriousness of the case. And again, there's a disclosure order, which is the authorities can request a disclosure on your assets, on your what you've got, assets, cash, any others, even locally or abroad. The US Patriot Act has several sections within the Act in terms of preventing terrorism financing. Section 301 for special measures for jurisdictions, for financial institution or international transaction. There's a section 312, which is organizations to carry out due diligence for correspondent accounts and private banking accounts. There's a section 313, which is where prohibition on United States correspondent accounts with foreign shell banks. There's again section 314, where cooperative efforts to deter money laundering, and section 319, forfeiture of funds in United States interbank accounts. So there is various sections there, which, as you can see, in terms of even verification of identification, there's anti-money laundering programs with regards to like whistleblowing, reporting suspicious activities by brokers and dealers, and even reporting suspicious activities by underground banking system, even if such as Hawala. That's again, or even illegal cryptocurrencies business. A new act which has already been mentioned, which is it brings out various changes in terms of disclosure of beneficial ownership, increase of money laundering penalties, and the whistleblower program, and improve on international cooperation, and again modernization. As you can see, cryptocurrency is evolving. Technology is evolving as well in terms of the softwares that needed to raise these red flags and detect. Another case study, which is please the last one. There's an ongoing case. I think the two individuals, dual Lebanese based in the UK, they're due to be sentenced next month. They've had a decade of shipping electronics equipment to a Hezbollah on television station in Lebanon. And the defendant and her husband had pleaded guilty to conspiring to commit tax fraud by concealing income from my employment in Virginia. So the individuals they were arrested, and the case is currently ongoing with regards to this. That is the end of the presentation, and I hope you've enjoyed. If you have any questions, please, I can either answer them later. No, conscious of time, Todd. Todd, I will hand over back to you.
Mohammed, thank you very much. We appreciate your presentation. That was very informational. We will get back to you with questions. I know there are some in the chat. And at this time, I know we have a special guest from the U.S. Department of State, and Mr. Oliver Wilcox has joined us. And at this time, I'm just going to read his bio. Oliver is an implementation-focused diplomat, national security, and international development professional. He shapes, builds, and leads policy initiatives and programs, strategic plans, budgets, and teams that drive them. He integrates local civil society and community engagement into diplomacy by partnering with youth and women, and diversity, equity, and inclusion aren't just for how foreign policy is staffed, but how it is implemented. He has directed and designed, managed hundreds of millions of dollars in peace, security, democracy, and governance strategies and programs in varied contexts, and led others to do it. He's monitored and evaluated some of these programs and changed things based on result, just like a good leader does. If we are going to learn from things that didn't work, we need to check under the hood, as he states. He's pioneered countering violent extremism and is the current acting director in the U.S. Department of State for countering violent extremism and policy and practice. He's developed and implemented multilateral CVE guidance and initiatives, which have reached hundreds of thousands of people. Dozens of countries have adopted these approaches. He's also an incisive policy analyst, writer, presentator, and briefer to varied audiences, trained editor who delivers tailored, clear, succinct, polished written products, and persuasive advocate and negotiator in multiple arenas. His colleagues call him an open, deliberate, and deliberative manager and mentor of productive office and teams. So at this time, for a special intervention, I'll turn it over to Mr. Oliver Wilcox from the U.S. Department of State. Sir?
Okay, well, thank you, Todd, and good afternoon to the group that we have assembled here. I'm not your normal countering the financing of terrorism practitioner in our Bureau of Counterterrorism at the Department of State. That's actually an entirely separate office. But my take on this issue is somewhat different, and that's why I approached Todd a couple of weeks ago to see if this sort of broadening the aperture type of presentation would be of interest, and I'm glad it is. So my title, if you will, for this presentation is essentially from regulation and enforcement to prevention. And we know that terrorists finance their operations and their plans through a variety of means, from kidnapping for ransom to smuggling and trafficking in persons to, as we saw particularly in Iraq and especially Syria, the looting of antiquities during the height of the so-called caliphate, imposing local taxes or extorting local populations, fraudulent businesses, and of course, charities and charitable contributions. And I would highlight an unusual example of this that we're tracking more recently, and that is the example of what the US government calls racially or ethnically motivated violent extremists, or what are perhaps more widely known as white supremacist violent extremists. For those that are familiar with the work of Cynthia Miller Idris at American University, she has studied how these racially or ethnically motivated violent extremists create and sell their merchandise. And for those of you who have teen children, you know that we're supposed to call it merch, not merchandise. They have hoodies, they have t-shirts, and the symbols or the symbology on these products are very subtle, and they're made deliberately that way so that members or supporters can recognize each other, they can purchase this stuff online, they can sell it online on platforms like Amazon, and at the same time sort of fly under the radar. So that's a recent manifestation of how violent extremism, if not terrorism, is being financed or being supported. Now, not surprisingly, the countering the financing of terrorism responses tend to be legal, regulatory, institutional, and organizational. And I think in some of the presentations of my colleagues, you can see that heavy emphasis on the development of new laws, how are they implemented and applied, how do different government entities enforce them. And one of the OECD resource guides in this field, the title sums up the focus quite well. It's called the Money Laundering and Terrorist Financing Awareness Handbook for tax examiners and tax auditors. So that sums up the sort of institutional and particularly sort of governmental enforcement authorities that tend to be at the heart of our CFT efforts. Now, what is my proposition or sort of added value as a countering violent extremism policymaker and practitioner to this area? My proposition is that just as in countering violent extremism, we say that we need a whole of government and whole of society approach to that area of counterterrorism. I would posit that we need to take a similar broader-based approach when it comes to countering the financing of terrorism. And in particular, we need to borrow some of the approaches and work with and through some of the partners that are common to countering violent extremism or CVE interventions. And this isn't a CVE presentation, but I'll just note briefly that CVE efforts are intended to try to prevent and counter the radicalization, recruitment, and inspiration of new followers of or supporters of terrorist groups. So in CVE, we do a lot of strategic communications work. We also do a lot of community-based prevention work. And these tools and many of the partners that we work with at that local level, I would argue, are somewhat of a missing slice of the CTF pie. They can be new tools in the CFT toolkit. We know that NGOs and civil society organizations are involved in CFT efforts, traditionally from a regulation of charities perspective. And here I would give you the example of post-Arab Spring Tunisia, when the new government there after 2011 stood up its domestic counterterrorism strategy, and the government body, the National Counterterrorism Committee, which oversees the implementation of the policy across government. The government took steps that are common in the CFT front. They developed their own domestic designations of individuals and groups. They froze the assets of those individuals and groups, and they put it out for the public, this information, on their website. They did outreach to financial institutions, real estate agents, and tax accountants to make them familiar with not just the laws and policies that were put on the books, but how they were being implemented and what they as professionals in the private sector would need to do to fulfill their obligations. In 2015, the government assessed 110 nonprofit organizations or NGOs deemed to be vulnerable to possible financing of terrorism. And in 2017, the European Union funded and implemented a number of workshops for these same nonprofit groups to basically raise their awareness and to build their capacity in terms of internal financial controls and being able to source and document financial contributions within the country and externally, so on and so forth. So these are fairly common or routine areas of CFT work that involve non-governmental entities. But again, my proposition here is that to really have fully effective CFT efforts, we need to broaden the aperture. We need to build out the toolkit. And this is why I argue that we need to look at countering violent extremism interventions as a way to build out that toolkit. So again, we need to work with civil society and with communities. And I'll just touch on a couple of brief approaches here that may be relevant for this type of work that I'm proposing. So in the media space for countering violent extremism, we and other countries have some experience training journalists in how to appropriately cover these issues, and with a particular focus, obviously, for journalists that operate in online media outlets, younger journalists that can reach sort of broader audiences, particularly in their local languages, non-European languages, and certainly not English. So how journalists cover the financing of terrorism and CFT efforts could be included in that type of work. The second area is public messaging. And I don't mean here what we think of in terms of advertising and billboards and things like that, very sort of national scale efforts at public messaging, but very local, tailored and very targeted efforts, again, with a real emphasis on understanding the local and the micro social media landscape and what sorts of messaging would resonate on those sort of local social media ecosystems, if you will, because they often function in that manner at a local level. Third would be what I call education-based approaches. And here, obviously, the material, the curriculum, how students are engaged or instructed in this would need to be age appropriate, culturally appropriate, and the types of work that we've supported here in the CVE space include school outreach. They include serious gaming for high school students. And so one could imagine a game where high school students have to either play the role of a financial intelligence unit from a Ministry of Finance, and how do they go after the financing of a particular terrorist group that's raising money through one or more means. One could imagine that type of serious game, because we've seen prototypes and actual games online that are broadly similar and actually quite popular with those students that have played them. The final thing I would note here is what we call, or what we have called, how do we work with other governments and, again, with particularly community leaders to support what could be called good giving. So we know that in many countries, particularly at the time of Ramadan, there are national and local organizations that may take contributions from citizens, but how do we use or how do our local partners, governmental and community, use those times to really promote and publicize awareness about what constitutes good giving, and then conversely, when appropriate, what may constitute bad giving, and what the consequences are of giving to organizations, individuals, or via other means that may not be appropriately or fully legal, regulatory, and especially religiously or culturally legitimate. So that is the fourth area that I'll mention today. I'll stop there. This is a somewhat unconventional approach and presentation, but one of my sort of professional objectives as a counterterrorism and specifically a countering violent extremism professional is to try to break down the stovepipes that exist within the civilian counterterrorism field. And just because my counterterrorism finance colleagues sit in another office in another building doesn't mean that we shouldn't work together from a policy or from a programmatic standpoint. So anyway, I'll conclude there, and I'm happy to take any questions or comments or turn it back to you, Todd. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Mr. Wilcox. Is there any questions? Countering violent extremism is exactly, I guess, a launching point for most terrorist organizations. It is necessary, specifically in, like you were talking about, cultural differences. We go over that in our orientation. And are there questions for Mr. Wilcox at this time?
Yes, I have wrote a question, please.
Go ahead, sir.
Sure. Go ahead, sir.
A question in the chat, please. Can you answer?
Let's see.
This is Mahar. It says, for country conflicts where no state government institutions, is there any control procedures for cross-border transactions and countering money laundering for conflict countries? How is this informal system study cases is working for those countries?
Okay, well, I would defer to my colleagues who are more sort of typical CFT specialists. But what I would say, since you mentioned borders and cross-border transactions, another area where CVE has intersected with border security or border management is in certain parts of West and Northern Africa, where we have trained local security forces, not just in how do you man or manage border checkpoints and conduct border security properly, but how do you engage with the communities that live at or on either sides of particular borders? As we know, in many parts of the world, borders are often artificial creations, not always, but often, and they were often the product of colonial rule. And I think it was Winston Churchill who said it best when he bragged that he drew the borders of the modern Middle East with his own pen. So in that context, borders may matter less to local populations and communities. And I think the more that we can work with local authorities, be they civilian or security or law enforcement, to engage communities and be able to build relationships with those communities, the more that we will empower them to legitimately and hopefully within some kind of rough rule of law context and human rights context, to be able to oversee cross-border transactions, or to be able to better manage border security. And again, the sort of traditional training for these people has been rather narrow. And the work that I mentioned that we've been doing, particularly in West Africa, countries like Senegal in particular, with some of its neighbors, we've broadened the aperture to be able to train those border personnel in community engagement.
Just a comment on that, Todd. It's very interesting, especially if you're working in Africa, like I do a lot, obviously. what people are not really thinking of is the actual, the borders are porous in the first place. A lot of the border fencing is down. If you look at countries like Botswana, Mozambique, South Africa, Lesotho, Swaziland, Namibia, they're huge. It's almost impossible to control them. And the price, the desperation of people in poverty, you don't need to transfer money. You can actually just get a person to walk it across. And this is the thing, you can control the border point, but you can't control the movement of people, because between South Africa, Botswana, Zimbabwe, nobody goes through the border. You just run across the river or cut through the veldt. And these people are exploited because it costs a lot of money to get a person to walk with you, and then they exploit them on the way and they steal their money. Or take them into the bush and rape them or whatever. But these borders are so porous, they're almost impossible to control. And I think that's a big issue, is actually looking at different ways to actually control those stretches of border, perhaps using drone technologies or something like that, so that you have long-range drones that can control. Because at the moment, it's almost, the whole of Southern Africa is almost impossible to control. It's that porous. So it's going to be a big challenge. The other problem is with the law enforcement side, is that, I mean, you can take a country like Botswana that's now sitting on the grey list, and maybe even on the blacklist by now for anti-money laundering CTF. Now, they have a Directorate of Economic Crime, for example. This Directorate of Economic Crime has been in place for about, I don't know, about 12 to 14 years now. They've never successfully prosecuted a case, ever. They've thrown hundreds of millions at training, never successfully prosecuted. They set up a unit that confiscates the money. They don't know how to do it. They've never been taught the methodologies. So all of these things are very new, and they need their hands held. But in a lot of cases, and I'm sorry, it may not be culturally sensitive, but it's a fact. They just, I mean, I've had people going in to train that walk out and go, these people are untrainable, they're too thick. I mean, there's just, you can't train somebody that doesn't even get the basics. And I think it's even, in order to combat this, you have to look even at the restructuring at primary schools so that you can teach critical thinking. Because without critical thinking, where do you go? So it's going right back to primary school to teach the capacity to use critical thinking. And that's a monumental challenge, but that's unfortunately where you have to start to really make an impact.
Thank you, Laurie. I know there's another question. I think it's Andrew. You have a question? I had one caveat to that. So when the digital yuan comes into play, which is being fielded right now, I know President Biden signed off on the US digital dollar, and when the digital money comes into play and there's no more paper money, how do you stop that? Or is that going to stop the cross-border money laundering if it's all digital?
That may stop the couriers and the mules that are actually transporting, or the dealing in the diamonds and these kind of things, which also, I mean, diamond trade is a massive financer of terrorist financing.
Sure.
There
Andrew, you have a question? Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off. Go ahead.
So, you know, if it all goes digital, well then, I mean, you're still going to have, unfortunately in Africa, you've got a problem because it's mineral rich. There's gold, there's silver, there's diamonds, there's platinum, there's everything. They're going to find a way to trade no matter what.
Thank you, Laurie. Andrew, you have a question?
Yeah, more of a remark. You feel free to treat it as a question if you want. I appreciate that you brought up the January 6th instruction, and that we have to sort of redefine what terror acts are in virtue of the issues at the domestic level. But where do you delineate as the State Department between sufficient information as far as intelligence gathering is concerned and correct proactive and reactive measurements to the intelligence available? I'm pretty sure as concerned citizens and the rights and privileges and authority that the intelligence community has, for the better, I'm not trying to criticize that aspect, but nonetheless, as a concerned public citizen, I'm pretty sure that there was plenty full of intelligence gathering done by the sister branches far prior to January 6th. So given the awareness and the techniques available and the mechanisms available to prevent it, why do you still think it went through?
Well, the events of January 6th were primarily a domestic departments and agencies bailiwick or issue. So the Departments of Homeland Security, Justice, and so on really are the ones that have been and continue to be in the driver's seat when it comes to the domestic arena here in the United States. Our role as the Department of State starts really and focuses on the overseas aspects. So we are focused on what we call transnational racially or ethnically motivated violent extremism, in particular white supremacist violent extremism. So that's sort of one distinction, important one, not just bureaucratic, but also in terms of the particular problem set that we're talking about. The second is that the Department of State can only designate international or foreign entities for special designation. For example, we don't have the tools to, and it's not our role to do that domestically here in the United States. That would be DHS, Treasury, Justice, etc. That would be their particular purview. I would say that generally the bar is set quite high for international designations. There's a lot of due diligence that has to happen. I would note that in April 2020, the United States did designate the Russian Imperial Movement, or RIM, which is a white supremacist organization, a transnational one, and we were able to sort of meet the bar for that in terms of being able to put together and make the case for why that particular designation. So there's a lot of, I think, expectation around, well, why don't you just designate more groups or networks? And the reality is that bureaucratically, you have to look at which department and agency you're talking about on the one hand, and on the other hand, we have to operate within a rule of law framework, and the process for putting together these designation packages, putting together basically the case for them, is an arduous process, but it's one that's actually happened quite expeditiously. If you look at all of the designations that have been coming out, not just since the change in administration, but even before, the number of individuals across different groups and geographies is it's pretty impressive. It's quite numerous actually. But one of the challenges with designating any of these white supremacist groups is that they don't tend to have centralized command structures the way that some of the groups, the different ISIS affiliates or Al-Qaeda affiliates do. And so that's, one of a number of factors that we looked at is sort of the level of command and control within an organization, because that obviously plays into, the degree to which terrorist plans and operations and other things are really, coordinated by and within an organization.
But just to that point as well, what we've also noticed is that the terrorism used to function a lot more almost like global corporations with a very defined structure. Now it's very much, there is a huge move to closed cells operating small, independent, quick to move, or lone wolf operators.
Yes.
Just somebody who'll wake up one morning with a mission and just go.
That's the part of the small business structure that we talk about where
they're mobile.
ISIS is branding itself out with, now there's ISIS-K, which is the Khorasan, and other affiliate agencies. And they have a mission and a vision, just like any other small business now. And it doesn't matter whether it's in Indonesia or it's in India or Pakistan. It's the same thing over and over. It's trying to counter it. Right. Go ahead.
The world is so stressed at the moment that all you need to do is take a couple of people and put them into a population that is looking for change, and that's half the population in the world.
Sure.
They want change. There's so much poverty. It's easy to influence people. You just need to infiltrate with 2 or 3 operatives, sow a certain seed, and get people to buy into your cause. And in 5 minutes, you've got a new cell. It's literally a 5-minute process, because people are, and in Africa, all you do is you offer a slight monetary incentive and you've got them. You can make anybody in Africa do anything for 20 pula. I mean, that's $2. Yeah. It's the easiest thing to swing, because people are desperate, and it's easy to influence desperate people.
Especially by promoting fear. And that's usually a precursor to anything that ever happens. It's people are afraid they're going to lose their Second Amendment rights. They're going to lose their First Amendment rights. They're going to lose this. They're going to lose that. Power and control is about what? It's the fear of not getting what you want or losing what you have. Those two things are starting at the house. But if you
do what I want, I'm going to pay you.
Exactly.
And that's where it ends up. And unfortunately, in Africa, it's quite bad in that 90% of law enforcement. I mean, in South Africa, just to give you a rather troubling statistic, they've sold 9 million guns that belong to the police force to the criminals. They cannot account for 9 million weapons. But we know that the police officers draw the weapons and then sell them to the criminals. And so literally the state has lost all its, we had these riots recently, and billions were buying bullets to give to the police, because the police had no bullets, because they've sold all the bullets to the criminals. So you're sitting with this problem where the state is actually, through the criminal element in the law enforcement, is actually equipping your terrorist or your criminal that's ripe to become a terrorist. And we've got a lot of issues with ISIS being so close now.
Yeah.
And they will recruit from innocent populations because that is what they do, and from desperate populations. And they are always going to follow that because it's easy. And so I think that's a lot of problems that you guys at the State Department could have a look at, because one of the big problems is cleaning up the law enforcement agencies in Africa and the corruption.
Anti-corruption agencies is a big thing now with countries, and that we're seeing a lot more, but we're seeing it in Indonesia, projects funded by USAID for anti-corruption programs. It's a good start, but even with countering violent extremism, the first part is starting at home. That's always the basic part to start. I mean, violence and the cycle of violence starts just in how we interact with people, how we talk, how discourseful or dispassionate we are. It always starts with what comes out of your mouth, and we need more leaders to speak a little bit more dispassionately so we can get things corrected. That's sort of the future that we see. And I'm actually going to hold off a second. Do we have any more questions for Mr. Wilcox? I know that he's got a lot on his plate with the State Department right now, and he has to go to another meeting soon. And so is there any other questions related to the CVE topic that he talked about in countering terrorism financing?
I have a follow-up if I can, just really quickly.
Go ahead.
So think about, okay, so I agree that in unstable states or nowhere near developed states, it is the narrative that you guys are mentioning in the last 5 minutes of within a couple of seconds, you can have an unforeseen destructive force. But what happens in states that were stable and eventually became destabilized? I'm primarily thinking about Ukraine here, for example, right? Because it's very hard to delineate in some regions of Ukraine. I mean, sure, there's a very transparent East and West split in Ukraine, where the Easterners side with the Russians and the Westerners are pro-NATO. But how do you delineate there as far as internal conflicts are concerned? Because there seems to be some structure, right? It doesn't seem to be the typical anarchic kind of narrative that you guys have been looking at recently. So what is the interest of the State Department when you are dealing with a little more nuanced groups that do favor the West for some clear reasons of joining the security umbrella and whatever else, but at the same time, there's a higher brink of being able to cooperate with them? I mean, think of the 2008 Bucharest summit, where we promised both Georgia and Ukraine that they'll be able to join the defense, and then eventually the Russians were like, no, that's not happening. And they managed to gain the upper hand in the region, and it further destabilized it. So what do you have to say to near promising allies that are somewhat interested in being part of the same security umbrella, but due to other hegemonic pressures, you cannot manage to pull through?
Well, I would just say that countering violent extremism or other aspects of civilian counterterrorism are relatively discrete missions within the broader U.S. foreign policy agenda, and we have to work across a variety of contexts, and that includes strong states, fragile states, failing states. So everything from Yemen, or what was Yemen, or is now parts of Yemen, to the weak states in sub-Saharan Africa that Lori was talking about. And we have to find ways to work in those settings. We don't have the resources or the staff to fix broader underlying conditions like corruption. We have limited resources. We have a very discrete mission, and we have to find a way to work within different contexts. And that's why working with civil society or working with communities is really important. And I would just foot stomp what one of the course participants mentioned in the chat regarding critical thinking. And in particular, I would really stress what we call media and digital literacy, right? And that could be, for sort of the terrorist or the violent extremist narrative generally. It could also be applied to, the fundraising pitches that they make for people to support them. So, yeah, we have to work in a variety of contexts, and even where we have good partners. Todd mentioned Indonesia, the BNPT, which is the counterterrorism government agency there, is a good partner, and they've really embraced countering violent extremism as part of their mission, including, I would add, rehabilitation and reintegration of terrorists or former terrorists, those in particular that have served time in prison. So, they're a good partner, but Indonesia is a huge archipelago nation, 250, 280 million people, hundreds, if not thousands of islands, once you get beyond places like Java and Solo. So even there where you have a fairly strong state and a good bureaucratic partner with good leadership, good staff, well-resourced, and trying to do a lot of the right things, it's still difficult for them to conduct, the counterterrorism mission, just given the geography and the topography that they have to deal with. So we have to sort of adjust to the particular context and do the best we can with the resources that we have.
That also helps with victims advocacy. I know Indonesia just redid their bill again for victims' rights for those victims that are affected by terrorism. Almost all countries need to adopt a victims' rights approach when we're talking about what happens in terrorism. And that's a first step. And it starts at home. Victims are victims. And it doesn't go away, and it happens for a long. And then there's migration that affects a lot of these things in conflict areas. And that victimness goes within those other regions when they're migrating as well. So is there any other questions? That was a fantastic intervention, sir. I appreciate your time.
Thanks.
We look forward to any more interventions in the future. We're actually going to do a CVE on a program we're working at in Bangladesh soon. I just didn't want to announce it soon. We're working with an agency. We actually put together trainings to give to some of the camps because there are young men who are willing to go help with countering violent extremism. We've partnered with ICVSE, and we're working with some agencies right now. We just haven't exposed it too much yet because it's still in the planning stages. And we're hopefully going to have our curriculum in Cox's Bazar soon so that other students can hear some of our work. We've been working on this.
Make sure just on that you connect with, and I'm happy to connect you with him, the Global Community Engagement and Resilience Fund, or GCERF, which is headquartered out of Geneva, and they've been working in Cox's Bazar for a couple of years now doing prevention programs.
Right, yeah. We're talking with a few students right now that are in our organization who are very interested in putting together programs on the ground. I started with the Hope Foundation years ago with the hospital and midwifery program in those camps in Bangladesh on the border, and I've been following that genocide since it happened way back when. And with that, Mr. Wilcox, thank you very much. We appreciate your time, and we hope to see you in the future on some of our other. I think next quarter we'll have another intervention and webinar series again. So thank you again, sir.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you. We can go back to Mr. Suresh Netke, who is. Are you still here, sir?
Yes, I am.
Yeah, we're gonna conclude soon. We're gonna open it up to questions for our speakers. And we have a few more minutes. If there are any questions for Mr. Mohammed Omar, Mr. Suresh Netke, Ms. Ella Rosenberg, and Mr. Wilcox, if there's any other questions, we'll let it go for another 15 minutes or so, and then we'll close out this session. So at this time, I'll let it to Mr. Suresh Netke if he has anything to say outgoing. We'd appreciate his remarks.
Yes, I think these were very insightful perspectives we got from a variety of different people. And I think the most notable thing is a lot of, let's say, bad actor activity, whether it is money laundering or terrorism or anything else, has been going on for a very long time. It is just getting a lot of technological impetus from bad actors. And my hope is that the good guys catch up on the technology front with the bad guys.
Right. And I'm aware you've been working on your software program for a long time. Do you have a few minutes to brief how that actually works?
Yeah, absolutely. I think one of the things that we have done is we've created technology to basically analyze very large amounts of data. And we work for banks, and we've also done a recent project with the federal government as well, at analyzing large amounts of data to predict what is likely to happen or who the bad actors or who the good actors are. So we've actually have software now which basically takes a lot of the data, analyzes it, predicts risk, and makes it available to people who can adopt it to their own specific needs. I think one thing which I'm particularly proud of is we've been investing a lot in what is called privacy protecting technology. And let me give you the premise. The premise of this is that one of the most important counters to money laundering or terrorism is the sharing of information between different financial institutions or government bodies. Now, in the United States and most other places where privacy is a concern, it's very hard to share information without or data without compromising privacy. And that's where we're investing a lot in our technology. We've recently released something called Lorem Privacy. It's a product which tokenizes, anonymizes individual information so that it remains private and yet it can be analyzed. And there's a whole slew of technologies like this coming out of the market right now. And what I would say is that technologies like ours, technologies that are coming in the market, are something which the entire industry can benefit from, especially as it lets them collaborate between themselves, share information, and leverage that to fight money laundering and terrorism.
Thank you, sir. I think Ella has dropped already. It's late in Tel Aviv. And I would say, Mohammed, are you there? Does anyone have any questions for Mohammed? Go ahead.
Was there any questions for me, Claude?
I think there were a few questions for Mohammed around sexual exploitation and sex trafficking and terrorism, if I remember earlier on in the feed.
Yeah, I'm looking.
Yeah, I think in terms of human trafficking, sexual harassment, we've seen the spike of illegal immigrants coming to Europe. And there has been some cases as well in the past. There's a lot of, money laundering that's happening with regards to this. What's happened when individuals want to get across Europe? They will not pay money through a bank transfer. There's various ways. Some either they're coming in through modern slavery, meaning that enforced labor, that they have to come across here to work. The others will be that they have to sell. There have been cases where individuals have to sell their kidneys just to pay to these criminals to transfer money. So when you look at it, this is serious organized criminal. Not only involved is just transferring of funds or buying drugs, It also involves terrorism, human trafficking, sexual harassment as well. So there has been cases, and this is why it has been very difficult for authorities to track the individuals behind, or the criminals behind this human trafficking, because it's a quite a big network. It is an international network, and even trying to track their funding. But I know Europol, I was looking at some case studies, they have been successful in the recent years trying to track down these individuals. However, there's still a long way to go. Yeah, so another one, I think there was another question. Let me have a look. Okay. So there was one, Hawala hope to define the risk value, identify risk for terrorists could consider for laundering under Hawala.
So, I mean, the only way I see Hawala going away is if there's no more paper money. You know, if you're using digital money, is there a way to intercept that transaction? Of course.
Yeah.
You know, and having a line of credit
is a classic example. Hawala was used in the 1993 terrorism in India.
Yes,
and also the same,
correct.
Al-Qaeda, they've been using Hawala even to the September 9/11. And that is the Al-Qaeda methods of, laundering money through Hawala. One of the issues that I want to mention is, which is we've not touched base, is as you've seen the COVID situation. I think Laurie has mentioned the COVID situation also with where vaccines going to developing countries. We've seen a spike of what you call organization that starting up these shell companies, let's say, saying that they're providing vaccines just to fraud individuals or private organization. Even during the COVID situation, there were organizations were being set up to sell face masks, which were fake, you know. So it is, and the COVID situation, we've seen the spike of increase of fraud on online radicalization, a lot of individuals, because technology is evolving. And as you can see now, for an example, recently in the UK, they're going to increase the contactless from £45 to £100, where you could pay with your mobile phone, or you could just a card without having to put your PIN. Now, just imagine how that criminals are going to use that to try and steal. And again, identity theft has been a big issue in terms of criminals are using it in terms of they're using ID theft. If somebody gets hold of your ID, they can actually go and open a bank account. And within a week, they can launder money across and then not be able to. So identity theft also has been an issue. So it's how do we protect our personal data? That is a very important. And also, how do you secure your personal data is also very important, because I think at the moment, we're using mobile phones. The mobile phones has given us everything that we put into our mobile phone. The only thing is it needs a hacker to hack into your system and get your information. And we've seen it, how hackers have been able to store personal data and sell it into the dark web as well. So whoever buys in dark web, they'll buy also through cryptocurrency as well, you know. So this is, again, I know where now there's a various app which you can apply in terms of crypto. You open up your crypto, all you need is like the identification verification is not what you would expect. It is just all you need, one form of ID, and that's it, okay? So there's still, when you look at the trends, recent trends in terms of that how, in terms of intervention, in terms of an enforcement and the compliance, I think as the situation with the COVID, because of rise of unemployment and criminals as well, are getting clever and clever using encrypted networks. So now it's going to be like the technology is evolving, we're going to have to be also go ahead of the time, because rather not being behind. So there is my take of this is that more and more awareness, education in all different sectors, because if you want to prevent terrorism or you want to obviously counter-terrorism financing, it's not only a banking institution that has to be responsible to alert it. It has to be all organizations, you know. And I know in the UK, they have very good systems like education sectors. They have safeguard, even school teachers are trained on countering terrorism. They prevent terrorism awareness. They have that. There are various prevention strategies in terms of the channel program where the family can. So, and I think these, when you look at comparison with best practices in Europe and best practices across the world and even in USA, these can be used in other developing countries, because when you've got, Laura's made a very good point, in Africa, not everybody go and put the money in the bank. There's a lot of cash transactions going on, cash to cash, and business to business. So who monitors that? How do you, and as you can see, there's a lot of corruption that ongoing, and I've seen recent cases as well, where the police themselves, they are not aware, or they have got no knowledge or to prevent these situations because of the corruption. So if you want to eradicate, and already we've seen sub-Saharan Africa, the Horn of Africa, and rise of terror, has shifted from Europe and America towards that in terms of terrorism. However, the law enforcement agencies there are kind of like behind. So there's a lot of education, and I think the government will need to put measures in place to make sure that they cut backs on the corruption, because you're not going to prevent this if there's still going to be a continuation of corruption ongoing within police forces. It's no way that's going to happen. And I will say that there is a lot need to be implemented and learn from past lessons and best practices across the world before you can implement it, because there is still a lot needs to be done.
You see, and I think, Mohammed, just something to think about is we've dealt a lot in this conference on the anti-money laundering and CTF, but I think it's what we haven't raised is money laundering is the movement of the proceeds of crime.
Yeah.
Terrorist financing doesn't necessarily involve the process of crime. It can be completely legitimately owned money, that's donated. And that's a lot more difficult to track.
Yeah.
Once you're working in the criminal side, yes, you can track the crime, you can track it back. But with CTF, it can be money that I go and earn and I donate it to Al Qaeda. It's perfectly legitimate funds that you may be moving, with people not really having a reason to suspect or think about it. And that's what makes CTF so much more intricate and difficult to track in a lot of cases. Whereas money laundering, it always starts with the proceeds of crime. There's always the preceding crime. And I think there lies part of the challenges when it comes to countering CTF.
Yes.
And with that, we're actually developing the curriculum, Ms. Ella Rosenberg is, and you have to have the basic understanding. Our criminal justice with investigations program lists what you both are talking about in the curriculum. Our students are going to get some of that in the criminal justice with investigations program. That actually orientation starts Monday, as well as our international security studies, which starts next week. So all of these conversations are playing into our curriculum that we've spent time and effort developing. And these webinars are a way to showcase what our educational curriculum is all about. And I want to thank all of the speakers. I'm getting messages, can you share the paper on this? You know, we have tomorrow, we have 6 presenters tomorrow. Today, we lost one of our presenters because she's ill, Miss Amanda Henninger. She's with the Joint Terrorism Task Force. She's the liaison we have with the BIED Society. She was going to talk more on her innovation and approach in her intervention with CTF. This presentation will be recorded. It is, and it'll be available soon. And the presentation and the materials, that is entirely up to the presenters if they want to share their material. For the paying folks in the webinar, you'll get your certificates sometime this week. Our students are always free from our Wix community, and the proceeds we get there covers the cost of the operations, which isn't very much. And so there is the availability of certificates to get them in our product store. Just look on there. I believe I posted the link in the Wix community. And for you non-members, there is a different membership option for the next 2 years. We're doing these webinars every quarter because we're showcasing our internship as they develop their papers and projects. They're also presenting on various counterterrorism topics. I think tomorrow we have some on incels, violent extremism. There's some on the Sahel region, many topics, many thesis statements, and we'll talk about more about that tomorrow.